In the depths of the ocean, where shadows linger beneath the surface, unexpected dangers lurk, waiting for the slightest disturbance. In these gripping tales of survival, everyday explorers and seasoned hunters face terrifying encounters with the ocean's most fearsome predators. Join us as we dive into chilling stories of survival, where the thrill of the hunt meets the terror of the unknown. Here are 6 stories. Natalia Mirova had worked hard to reach this moment. At 28, she was one of Russia's rising film stars, known for her fierce determination and love for daring roles. When she signed on to play an adventurous oceanographer in Beyond the Abyss, she insisted on doing all her own underwater stunts. The production had moved to the South African coast, where the water ran deep and the marine life was real. The plan was ambitious: to capture a tense diving scene in open water, using real bait to attract small fish around the fake coral reef constructed beneath the surface. The crew had been preparing for weeks. Shark specialists were on site, divers were in place, and every possible safety measure had been taken, or so they thought. On May 5, 2025, the sea looked calm. Clear skies stretched across the horizon and the wind was gentle. Natalia suited up in a sleek black wetsuit, her dark hair pulled tight under her diving hood. She climbed onto the boat's edge, gave the camera crew a thumbs up, and slipped quietly into the water. Below her, the underwater set looked surreal, an artificial coral reef constructed of plastic and painted foam, meant to evoke mystery and ancient secrets. Around it, schools of fish shimmered in the light. A light trail of chum had been released just minutes before to attract more fish, creating a cinematic effect of life and movement in the water. But it attracted more than just small fish. What no one anticipated was the presence of an 18-foot great white shark cruising the deeper waters nearby. Drawn by the scent and the sudden increase in activity, it moved in fast and without hesitation. Natalia was moving toward a rock formation on the artificial reef when the water behind her shifted. In a flash, the shark surged upward from the blue void. The animal's massive head broke through the shimmering bait cloud, jaws wide and eyes black as death. It clamped down on Natalia's thigh with bone-crushing force. She never saw it coming. The water exploded in a burst of bubbles and blood as Natalia was dragged downward. The initial strike broke through muscle and tissue, tearing through her leg. She thrashed instinctively, panic setting in as she was yanked away from the set. Her regulator stayed in her mouth, but her body screamed in agony as she struggled against the predator. Above, chaos erupted. Safety divers saw the attack through the murky water and rushed toward her. One of them, a former Marine named Jacobs, kicked hard with his fins, spear in hand. He lunged at the shark, jabbing the weapon into its gill area. The shark flinched, twisting away with a slow, wide turn, still gripping Natalia as it moved. Another diver struck the side of the shark's snout with a metal rod, the shock finally making the beast loosen its grip. Natalia floated upward as the shark released her. Blood clouded the water around her like smoke. 2 divers grabbed her arms and legs and propelled her upward with all the strength they had. She was barely conscious, her eyes glassy from pain and shock. Her thigh was mangled, sinew and bone exposed, and her wetsuit shredded. By the time they reached the surface, the water trailing behind her had turned deep red. The crew pulled her onto the dive platform with trembling hands. One of the paramedics immediately applied a tourniquet to her leg as the helicopter was called in. Natalia's breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Her lips trembled from the cold and the trauma, and her hands gripped the medic's arm with fading strength. It took less than 15 minutes for the helicopter to arrive, but every second felt eternal. The flight to the hospital was a blur. She went in and out of consciousness, flashing between the moment of impact and the unbearable pressure of the shark's jaws. The emergency team worked fast. Surgeons spent hours repairing the damage: torn arteries, shredded muscle, and cracked bone. They saved her leg, but barely. Back on the set, the production halted immediately. Divers scoured the water for any sign of the shark, but it was long gone. Investigators confirmed it had been drawn in by the fish activity and the use of chum, something that would never be allowed again in such proximity to a live diver. The crew was shaken, especially the safety team who had trained for this but had never truly believed it could happen. In the hospital, Natalia faced a long recovery. The pain was constant, the scarring permanent, yet she didn't break. Despite the trauma, she showed a resilience few expected. 2 weeks later, she gave a quiet statement from her hospital bed. She wouldn't quit the film. She would return, even if only for the last scenes, scarred and changed, but unbroken. Her team prepared to shoot the remaining underwater scenes in a closed tank without real marine life. Natalia returned to the set 6 weeks later. Her movements were slower. The wetsuit now had to be adjusted to accommodate compression wraps and a noticeable brace on her leg. The final scenes were filmed with caution, but with powerful emotion. She was no longer just acting. Her fear and determination on screen were real. Every breath she took underwater felt like a challenge to the memory of what had happened. The movie wrapped quietly. No media circus followed, as the production crew chose to keep the footage of the attack private. What remained was the story of a woman who had faced the most feared predator in the sea and survived. Natalia's return to the ocean was tentative. She would never dive the same way again. The sea had changed for her. It was no longer a place of beauty alone, it had shown her its teeth. But she endured. The scar on her leg, the limp in her step, and the haunted look in her eyes became part of her story. Not just as an actress, but as a survivor. The moon hung low over the Indian Ocean, casting silver streaks across the surface of the calm sea. Off the coast of Mozambique, 3 divers prepared to descend into the depths. Emma Pearson, a 35-year-old marine biologist and seasoned diver, checked her gear methodically. She had over a decade of experience in deep-sea dives, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her partner Tom, 38, was less experienced but reliable, drawn into diving through Emma's passion. His younger brother Ryan, just 24, was athletic and adventurous, but this would be only his 3rd night dive. He had begged to join, eager to prove himself. Their target lay 80 feet below, a wrecked freighter partially buried in sand, known among locals for its eerie silhouette and pockets of curious sea life. The trio entered the water from their anchored boat, each carrying a powerful torch. The world turned black as they submerged, their lights slicing through the inky darkness. For the first 10 minutes, everything went smoothly. The descent was quiet except for the rhythmic hiss of their regulators. Bioluminescent plankton flickered like stars in the deep. As they approached the wreck, Emma signaled for them to slow. She always liked to scan the environment before drawing closer. The twisted metal hull loomed ahead, barnacle-covered and ghostly. Fish darted in and out of broken windows. Everything seemed calm, but something felt wrong. Emma noticed the fish scattering. A school of jacks, once cruising lazily through the wreckage, vanished in an instant. She hovered in place, light sweeping back and forth. Her gut tightened. The water had grown colder. The silence deepened. She motioned for the others to stay close. That was when the darkness shifted. From the shadows beneath the wreck, a large bull shark surged forward with terrifying speed. It struck Emma first, jaws clamping down on her leg just above the ankle. She barely had time to register the shape before pain erupted through her body. The shark yanked hard, dragging her downward and slamming her against the wreck's metal hull. She kicked and thrashed as blood exploded from the wound, clouding her vision. Her torch dropped into the silt, its beam flickering uselessly. Tom lunged after her, reaching for her arm, trying to pull her free as she struggled. The shark turned sharply, releasing Emma as it sensed the flurry of movement. It vanished into the dark again. Emma felt her body going numb. Her fin was gone, her leg limp, and her mind clouded by shock. Tom grabbed her tightly and began swimming upward, trying to get her out of danger. Ryan hovered nearby, panicked, uncertain whether to flee or fight. His torch darted wildly through the water as he tried to track the shark. But the bull shark wasn't done. It returned with brutal force, this time targeting Ryan. From behind him, it accelerated, jaws wide, and slammed into his side. Its teeth ripped through the wetsuit, puncturing flesh and bone. Ryan twisted violently in the water, blood surging from his torso. He dropped his torch, which tumbled slowly downward like a dying star. Emma, still clutching Tom's arm, watched in horror as the water turned red around Ryan. Tom let go of her and kicked toward his brother, fists pounding the water, trying to scare the shark off. But the animal circled, fast and relentless. Ryan struggled, hands reaching out as the shark struck again, biting into his shoulder and dragging him downward into the black. Tom gave chase, but he was no match for the predator. Emma, weak and bleeding, floated near the surface. Her mask fogged, vision spinning. She could hear the distant rhythm of her own heartbeat, louder than the ocean itself. Ryan was gone. The shark had vanished with him into the wreck's shadows. Tom resurfaced seconds later, gasping, eyes wide with disbelief. He reached Emma, pulling her up by her harness. The two of them kicked desperately, rising together as fast as they could. Emma's blood left a trail behind them, a streak through the water that felt like a beacon for death. They broke the surface with a splash, sucking in the night air. Emma was barely conscious. Tom screamed for help toward the boat, where the support crew had already spotted their lights and were rushing to the edge. Hands pulled them from the water. A medic pressed bandages to Emma's leg, trying to slow the bleeding. Tom dropped to the deck, shivering, face pale, muttering Ryan's name under his breath. The younger brother hadn't surfaced. No one expected him to. The boat sped toward shore as radio calls went out. Search crews returned at dawn with divers and equipment, but the wreck was empty. They found pieces of torn neoprene and a bloodied flashlight half buried in sand. No body, no sign of the shark. Emma underwent surgery later that day to repair the damage. Her lower leg had been partially crushed, the tendons severed. She would walk again, but her diving days were over. Tom stayed by her side, silent and broken, haunted by the image of Ryan being dragged down, arms outstretched in the dark. Authorities listed the attack as a fatal shark encounter. Locals whispered about the wreck being cursed, about night dives that ended in silence. For Emma and Tom, it was no ghost story. It was the cruel, real violence of nature. A moment of stillness was shattered by power and instinct. The sea gave no warnings, no roar, no howl. Just the quiet rush of water and a flash of motion, followed by agony and silence. The ocean didn't grieve, but the survivors did. Emma never returned to diving. Tom moved inland, away from the coast. The boat was sold. The wreck site was marked off limits. Ryan's name was etched into a stone along the harbor wall, the inscription facing the sea. Every night after, Emma dreamed of bubbles and darkness, and the feeling of something just below. The sun had just begun to rise over the western Australian coast, painting the waves gold as they rolled gently toward the beach. Jack Morrison stood barefoot in the sand, scanning the lineup. At 42, he had spent most of his life on a board. A surf instructor and former competitive surfer, he had taught hundreds of people how to read the sea, how to respect it, and how to survive it. That morning, a group of 6 tourists, all beginners, gathered around him, hanging on his every word. They were eager and smiling, unaware of what waited beneath the surface. The swell was perfect, clean sets, light offshore wind and warm water. It was one of those rare days that made the ocean feel friendly. Jack led the group into the water, watching carefully as they paddled out. Among them was Carla, a 26-year-old traveler from Spain, fit and confident but new to surfing. She had picked it up quickly during the first 2 days of lessons, and Jack had taken a liking to her enthusiasm and fearless attitude. By mid-morning, the group had moved into slightly deeper water. Jack was further out, watching them take turns catching waves. His eyes scanned constantly. He had seen what the ocean could do: rip currents, rogue waves, and jellyfish stings. But sharks were always the dark thought at the back of every surfer's mind. Rare, yes, but never impossible. Then something shifted. The seabirds that had been hovering above scattered all at once. A pod of dolphins vanished, slicing back toward deeper water. Jack's instincts flared. He turned sharply toward Carla, who was sitting on her board just 30 feet away, smiling and unaware. That was when he saw the shape, massive, fast, and silent, rising from the deep behind her. Before he could yell, the water exploded. A great white shark, nearly 16 feet long, surged upward, jaws wide. It struck from beneath, launching its head above the surface with terrifying speed. Its teeth clamped down on Carla's leg, pulling her from the board. She disappeared beneath the water in a burst of blood and foam. The board flipped and drifted empty. Jack paddled hard, faster than he ever had. His body moved on instinct, heart pounding in his ears. The other tourists screamed and scrambled for shore, but he didn't look back. He reached the spot where she had gone under and dove off his board. Below the surface, blood clouded the water. Carla was still conscious, kicking with her free leg, arms flailing. The shark had her by the thigh, thrashing as it tried to pull her deeper. Jack grabbed her under the arms, fighting against the current, trying to pry her free. He kicked the shark hard with both feet, aiming for the gills. The shark let go. Carla's leg was mangled, torn nearly to the bone, but she was alive. Jack surfaced with her, gasping, holding her head above the water. Her face was pale, eyes wide with shock. Blood poured from the wound, staining the sea red. Jack pulled her onto his board, lying her flat across it, her leg dangling. The beach was far, too far. Jack started paddling, every muscle burning. Carla was barely conscious. He screamed in his head for someone to help, but no one was close. Then he felt it again. That pressure in the water, that shift in the current. The shark was back. It came from the side this time, mouth open, eyes black and dead. Jack spun the board just as it lunged. He shoved his board between them and swung his arm, punching at the nose. The shark slammed into the board, teeth grazing Carla's calf before it veered off. Jack lost his balance but didn't let go. He climbed back on and paddled harder. The shark circled. It was tracking the blood, following the trail with unrelenting precision. Jack kicked at it as it neared again, yelling into the wind even though no one could hear. He grabbed Carla's hand, squeezing it hard. She blinked slowly, still alive. The beach came closer. A lifeguard sprinted into the water with a rescue tube, waves crashing against his legs. Jack kept going until the man reached them. Together they dragged Carla to shore. Blood soaked the sand as they laid her down. Her face was ashen, and her breathing shallow. The crowd backed away in stunned silence. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They clamped pressure pads on her leg, loaded her into a stretcher, and rushed her to the hospital. Jack stood back, his wetsuit stained with her blood, chest heaving, hands trembling. Carla survived. Doctors said it was a miracle. The bite had torn through muscle and severed tendons but missed major arteries. Her leg would never be the same, but she would walk again. Jack visited her a week later. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. The beach reopened a week later, but the tourists were gone. So was the peace. Jack tried returning to the water, but something inside him had changed. The image of Carla being pulled under replayed in his mind every time he closed his eyes. He kept hearing the silence before the strike. He could no longer trust the calm. The attack was investigated, cataloged as a rare but natural event. The local government posted new shark safety guidelines. But life moved on. The sea looked the same. The waves still broke perfectly. But beneath them, Jack knew, something always waited. He still went down to the beach each morning. Sometimes he watched the sunrise. Sometimes he just sat in the sand, staring at the horizon. He never took another student out past the break. And he never forgot what it sounded like when the water turned quiet. Not every scar was visible. Carla's leg would bear the marks of the attack forever. But Jack carried his on the inside, etched deep where no one could see, where only the ocean could reach. The sun rose over the Seychelles, casting shimmering light across the calm Indian Ocean. For the people of the coastal village, this day marked the annual Festival of the Sea, a cherished tradition of food, music, and deep respect for the water that sustained their lives. Tourists gathered from around the world to take part in the celebrations, eager to witness the customs of a fishing community bound to the tides. Zane Toussaint, 40 years old, stood on the dock tightening the ropes on his small fishing boat. Weathered and broad-shouldered, Zane had lived his whole life by the sea. He had learned to fish from his father and now passed on those skills to others. Today, like every year, he would take a small group of guests out for a deep-sea fishing trip. It was supposed to be the highlight of the morning, one of the most immersive experiences the festival offered. The boat launched just after 8. The sky was clear, and the waters unusually still. On board were 5 tourists, 2 couples and a solo traveler, all eager to catch something big. Zane showed them how to handle the rods, how to feel the tension in the line, and how to read the pull of the current. The engine cut and they drifted far from shore. The village was reduced to a thin strip of land behind them. By mid-morning, the fish were biting. The tourists laughed and shouted as they hauled in tuna and snapper. The deck grew slippery with seawater and fish blood. One of the tourists, a tall man from Denmark, reeled in a massive barracuda. Zane helped lift it over the side, his hands quick and practiced. The struggle, the smell, the excitement, it was exactly what he loved about these trips. But as the catches increased, so did the chaos. Blood from the fish washed through the scuppers and into the sea. Unseen below, something stirred. Zane bent over to untangle a hook when a sudden jolt rocked the boat. Everyone froze. The Danish man lost his balance and nearly fell overboard. Zane shouted for everyone to stay still and peered into the water. For a moment there was nothing but bubbles. Then from the deep blue a shape emerged. The tiger shark was enormous, nearly 14 feet long, striped and thick-bodied, moving like a torpedo. It circled the boat once, slowly, with measured precision. Then it disappeared beneath them again. Zane's heart pounded. He had seen sharks before plenty of times, but never one this bold, never one this close. He moved toward the rear of the boat to reel in the bloodied lines, hoping to remove the lure that had drawn it in. Then it struck. The shark surged upward, mouth open, and latched onto Zane's leg with crushing force. The pain was blinding. It pulled him hard, slamming him against the gunnel. His leg tore against the teeth, shredding his calf as the shark tried to pull him overboard. Blood poured down his thigh. He gripped the railing with both hands, screaming silently as he fought to stay on board. One of the tourists, a woman in her 30s, rushed forward and grabbed Zane's arm. She braced herself against the boat and pulled with everything she had. Another man joined her, grabbing Zane's belt. The shark thrashed, unwilling to let go, its body half out of the water, splashing blood across the deck. Zane reached for the emergency gaff. He swung it wildly at the shark's head. The first hit missed. The second slammed into its snout. The shark let go, slipping back beneath the water in a swirl of crimson. Zane collapsed onto the deck, blood gushing from the shredded remains of his calf. His face turned gray. His breathing was shallow and rapid. Panic swept the boat. One of the tourists radioed for help. The others pressed towels to Zane's leg, trying to slow the bleeding. The water around the boat churned. The shark was still circling. Then it struck again, this time crashing into the hull with terrifying speed. The impact cracked the fiberglass. A spray of water burst upward through the side. Zane tried to speak but couldn't. His lips barely moved. The others scrambled to grab life jackets and emergency flares. Another slam hit the hull and the boat rocked sideways. One man slipped and slammed into the bait bucket. The woman who had helped Zane pulled out a small flare gun and fired it into the sky. The shark swam away. Minutes passed like hours before a rescue vessel reached them. Zane was unconscious by the time they lifted him from the deck. His blood soaked the towels, and one of the tourists had to hold his hand to keep his pulse going. They rushed him back to shore, sirens wailing as festival music continued in the distance, now drowned out by urgency and fear. Zane survived, but barely. He spent weeks in the hospital undergoing multiple surgeries. The shark had torn through muscle and tendon, crushing parts of the bone. Doctors saved his leg, but he would never fish again. He walked with a cane now, a permanent limp marking where the sea had claimed a piece of him. The festival continued, but it would never be the same. The boat was hauled in and inspected. Bits of shark tooth were found embedded in the hull. Authorities concluded that blood in the water from the heavy fishing had likely drawn the predator in. No one was blamed. It was nature doing what it does. But for Zane, it was a final chapter. He no longer went to the docks. His boat, once a symbol of pride, remained moored and unused. The sea that had raised him, fed him, and shaped his identity had turned on him. His scars ran deep, far beyond the bite. Yet each year when the Festival of the Sea came again, he watched it from a distance. The ocean was still beautiful, but he no longer trusted its silence. The Pacific waters off the California coast were calm, the surface smooth like glass under the late morning sun. A United States Navy support vessel rocked gently in the swell. On board, a team of elite divers prepared for a deep-water training exercise. The mock mission was designed to simulate the recovery of a downed submarine, standard procedure for the unit, which specialized in deep-sea search and rescue. The crew had done this dozens of times before, but this dive would not end like the others. Petty Officer First Class Mason Reed, 32, tightened the straps of his gear and gave the signal to drop. A former competitive swimmer turned military diver, Mason was focused and unshakable, respected by the entire team. Beside him were 4 others, all highly trained. Their goal was simple: descend to 110 feet, locate the mock wreckage on the seafloor, secure it with flotation bags and surface. They splashed in, descending slowly into the blue. Visibility was poor below 60 feet. The sunlight faded, and the divers switched on their shoulder lights. The water around them felt heavy and slow. Mason reached the training site first. The fake submarine shell lay where it had been placed. A gray structure resting in a shallow trench, surrounded by sand and seaweed. As they began to work, vibrations rippled through the water. The team noticed the change in pressure. It was subtle, just enough to trigger instincts honed over the years. Something massive was moving through the water nearby, but no one could see it yet. The divers moved with increased urgency, keeping a tight formation. Mason signaled for awareness and continued securing the rigging. Then, from the deep, a massive shape surged into the light. The great white shark was over 18 feet long, broad and scarred. It appeared from beneath, swimming low and silent before suddenly turning upward. In seconds, it was upon them. Mason didn't see it until it struck. The shark slammed into one of the divers, Petty Officer Brooks, teeth clamping around his left arm, crushing muscle and bone. Bubbles exploded from Brooks' mouth as the shark dragged him several feet before letting go. Blood clouded the water in thick ribbons. Panic erupted in the team. Mason rushed toward Brooks, who spun helplessly in the current, his severed wetsuit sleeve flapping as blood streamed from his wound. The others closed in around them, forming a defensive ring. The shark turned and came back, drawn by the scent. It moved with terrifying speed, its massive tail carving through the water like a whip. One of the divers jabbed a rescue pole at its face. Another triggered a flare, the sudden burst of light temporarily disorienting the predator. The shark veered off, circling, watching. Mason grabbed Brooks under the armpits and kicked hard toward the surface. Blood trailed behind them. The others followed, scanning the water below for the shape that refused to disappear. The ascent felt endless. At 40 feet, the shark returned. It surged upward again, jaws open, aiming for Mason's legs. He twisted just as it passed beneath him, the tail brushing his fin. A second flare burst behind them, forcing the shark to retreat once more. They broke the surface in chaos. The crew on board yanked Brooks from the water, laying him on the deck. His arm was mangled, the bone exposed and the muscle torn. He was conscious but fading fast. His body was in shock. Mason climbed aboard next, his hands trembling as he pulled off his gear. The others followed, faces pale, adrenaline surging. Medics worked quickly. A tourniquet was applied. The helicopter was already inbound. Brooks was still alive when they loaded him onto the stretcher, though barely. His lips moved in faint gasps as the aircraft lifted off toward the mainland. Back on the ship, silence settled over the team. They reviewed the footage from their helmet cams, trying to understand what had happened. The shark hadn't been seen during the pre-dive checks. There had been no recent reports of aggressive behavior in the area. Experts would later suggest the vibrations from the equipment or the light glinting off gear may have triggered the shark's curiosity, or mistaken identity in murky water. But those explanations didn't help the team sleep that night. Brooks survived, but the damage was permanent. Surgeons saved his arm, but he lost nearly all function below the elbow. Tendon and nerve damage ended his diving career instantly. The once strong swimmer would never again lift his gear or dive beneath the waves. Mason visited him in the hospital weeks later. Brooks was pale, tired, and his body was thinner than before. But he was alive. That mattered. The Navy classified the event as an anomaly, not a failure. No fault was found in the procedure. The ocean, they said, remained unpredictable no matter how many safeguards were in place. Sharks did not hunt humans, but they reacted to instinct. And sometimes instinct turned violent. Mason returned to duty but carried the memory with him. Each dive felt different now. He trusted the water less. The quiet between breaths, once peaceful, now felt like a warning. He saw the image of Brooks spinning through red-tinged water every time he closed his eyes. The team moved slower after that, more cautious, their jokes fewer. The ocean had reminded them it was never truly safe. And even though the shark had vanished after the last strike, its presence lingered in every ripple, every shadow. The dive zone was closed temporarily. Research vessels were dispatched to monitor activity, but the great white was never seen again. Maybe it moved deeper. Maybe it waited. For the Navy, the incident became a footnote in a larger book of ocean hazards. For Mason, it became something else, a scar beneath the surface, invisible but lasting. He no longer swam for fun. He no longer saw the sea as a place of peace. It was a place of silence, of sudden violence, and of power beyond human control. And it only took seconds to change a life forever. The morning fog had not yet fully lifted as Kate paddled her kayak into the quiet inlet off the coast of New Zealand. The water was glassy, the air crisp, with only the sound of her paddle slicing through the calm. Kate, an experienced kayaker in her early 30s, had been here countless times before. It was her favorite spot, a secluded inlet surrounded by towering cliffs, with no one around for miles. Just the ocean, the sky, and the feeling of being alone with nature. Today, however, there was an unsettling stillness in the air. The water felt too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The gulls, which usually called out as she passed by, were nowhere to be heard. She dismissed the feeling as a result of the early hour. It was just her mind playing tricks, she told herself. The ocean had always been peaceful to her, a place where she felt in control. But today, that sense of control would be shattered in an instant. Kate paddled further into the inlet, her kayak moving steadily through the water. She had planned to explore the small cove ahead, a place she hadn't visited in months. The tide was low, and the water was so clear she could see the rocky seabed beneath. As she moved deeper into the inlet, the shadows grew longer, stretching out from the rocks that lined the water's edge. The wind had picked up slightly, but the conditions were still calm, almost eerie in their serenity. It was then that she saw it, a shadow beneath the water, large and ominous. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, perhaps a school of fish swimming in formation, or a large rock just beneath the surface. But the shadow moved, shifting slowly, deliberately. Her heart skipped a beat. Kate's instincts told her something was wrong, but she refused to let fear take hold. She had spent years in the water, and sharks, while always a concern, were a rare occurrence in this area. She paddled on, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of unease creeping up her spine. She was being irrational, she told herself. The shadow could have been anything. The ocean was vast, and it wasn't uncommon for marine life to appear suddenly. But the further she paddled, the larger the shape seemed to become. It was circling beneath her, moving with a calculated grace. Then, without warning, it struck. The force of the blow knocked her sideways. Kate's kayak flipped in an instant, sending her into the cold, dark water. Panic surged through her chest as she surfaced, gasping for air. Her heart raced, and her eyes scrambled for a glimpse of what had just attacked her. A massive bull shark, easily 12 feet long, was circling in the water around her, its dark, soulless eyes fixed on her, its massive tail propelling it with terrifying speed. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The shark was close, too close, its fins cutting through the water like blades. Kate's mind raced. She reached for the kayak, which had been knocked upside down. She was still close to it, but the shark's presence made it feel like a lifetime away. Her fingers brushed the hull, but as she tried to push herself back toward it, the shark lunged. Kate screamed as the shark struck, its powerful jaws closing around the side of the kayak with an explosive force. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the water. The kayak was torn in half, pieces of it floating around her. She flailed, trying to stay afloat, but the cold water gripped her like ice. Her thoughts scrambled. She knew she had to move, had to get away from the shark, but there was nowhere to go. The open water stretched out before her, nothing but the endless expanse of blue. She tried to swim, but her arms felt heavy, her legs slow in the water. She knew sharks could sense blood, and her fear, her heart pounding in her chest, could be enough to attract it. The shark circled again, its shadow looming beneath her, waiting. The water was beginning to cloud with the debris from her kayak, and the shark seemed to be drawn to it. Kate's breath came in short, frantic gasps. Her eyes darted from side to side, desperate for any sign of escape. Her paddle was gone. The water was too deep for her to stand. She had no choice but to try to swim for the shore, even though it felt miles away. But the shark was faster, and it was getting closer. She kicked furiously, her arms burning, but it was like trying to outrun a storm. Then the shark struck again. It hit her from behind, knocking her off balance. She felt its teeth graze the back of her leg, the sharp, cold pressure of them digging into her flesh. She screamed, the pain searing through her body, but she didn't stop moving. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to survive. She clawed at the water, trying to push herself away from the predator, but it was relentless. Just as she thought she couldn't go on, she saw it, the shoreline. It was closer than she had imagined, a thin sliver of sand just beyond the rocks. She pushed herself harder, using every last ounce of strength. The shark's presence lingered, but it didn't strike again. Maybe it had lost interest, or maybe it had grown weary of the chase. Either way, she didn't wait to find out. With the last of her strength, Kate crawled onto the shore, her body trembling, her leg throbbing with pain. She collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air, blood staining the water around her. The beach was deserted, as it always was, but she could feel the weight of the silence. She had survived, but it was a hollow victory. Her heart still raced, and the taste of fear lingered on her tongue. She didn't know how long she lay there before the first waves of exhaustion took over. But when she finally stood up and looked back at the water, the shark was gone. The inlet was still, its surface once again a mirror of tranquility. But Kate knew the truth now. The ocean was not always a friend. Sometimes it was a predator, and she would never forget the feeling of being hunted.